Hey you guys, hi, Tamara here. I'm so glad you're coming by today. I just finished shooting this tutorial, so I know how it turns out. I'm very excited to present to you a way to take an easy sheath style dress and turn it into something super mod and fun using color blocks. So I'm going to be using the pattern called Pop Sugar, and I'm making the outfit today for the 20-inch Sissy doll. So come on along and I'll show you how to take a simple pattern and turn it into a really cool color block. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with that color blocking idea. So first of all, as a repeat, we are using the Pop Sugar pattern. In this case, this is showing on the FID doll, but we're making it for Sissy. So let's go ahead and put that to the side and talk about the pattern pieces. So this dress is super simple, which is why I chose this design. I hadn't tried to color block before in this way, but I thought it would be fun to give it a try. So this dress has just three basic pieces: the front of the dress, the back of the dress, and a collar at the neck. So what I went ahead and did is I cut the pieces out. So the front of the dress is cut on a fold, so I want to make sure I keep that in mind because that is going to be where we're going to have to add a seam allowance. The back of the dress is not going to be color blocked in this demonstration, but you would use the same principles that we're going to talk about here. And then the collar I'm going to do out of a solid piece. So in this case, all we're really working with is this front section. Now, what I did is I went ahead and duplicated the pattern on the other side. So in essence, I want to work from the right or the left front side when I'm putting the color blocks together. From there, I just got my measuring square, a couple pieces of paper, a pencil, and also a marker, just to kind of keep me going with what I'm trying to accomplish. Once you've identified which pattern you're going to use for your color blocking, the second thing is going to be to determine what colors you want to use. So in this case, I thought it would be fun to use sort of summery colors. So what we're going to do once we've determined that we're going to use these particular pattern colors is we have here 5 choices. So now that I'm looking at my pattern piece, I want to make sure I have at least 5 blocks, if not more, to use a little bit of each of those color samples in the blocking. So I have my measuring square right here. I've duplicated my front pattern piece, and those are the 2 that we'll be working with, but I'm going to work one side and then the other. So this is nice because this piece for the pattern is cut on the fold, therefore it has a straight line or a 90-degree angle that I can already work with. So using my measuring square, I'm literally just going to pick some different areas where I want to make a seam allowance to create that color block. And I did this in advance already, but as you can see, I just measured across in a horizontal line 90-degree angles to a 90-degree angle. So that's why the measuring square comes in useful. Now, one thing I found when I did the first sample was it's a lot easier for a pattern with some darts in it to be in the same color block. So when I did it, I had the dart going into that second color, and it was a little bit more challenging to line it up. This case, I changed it, and I have all the blocks separate with that dart being in its own color. I go ahead and pick a few sections, and I've got my first set of blocks. So you can see it's just 90-degree angle and everything's at a right angle. So then I went ahead and took the second piece. Now I didn't want it to be exactly reverse, which you could do that, just transfer the lines over, but I wanted to make it a little bit more uneven, I guess, is what you would properly say. So I went ahead and I do have one common seam here, and that's going to be just below the waist, and I have an additional common seam here right at the hemline. But I chose to split this block into 2 pieces. So now that I have my blocks separated out and I've measured those different square areas, I'm going to go ahead and cut the pattern apart. You can see here that I went ahead and I've taken the original pieces with the color blocking and I've just made a cut where I want each block to appear. So when I do that, I want to transcribe those pattern pieces onto another piece of paper. The reason I have to do that is I need to find out where to add the quarter-inch seam allowance back in to create the block for that section. So as you can see here, I've taken all my cut pieces and transcribed them onto this piece of paper. From there, I need to determine where I need to add the seam allowance in order for that color block to be sewn together. And I've done that on the second side here. The pink indicates where I actually made the cuts to the pattern or where the pattern is actually lying on a fold. So if it's on a fold, I need to add a seam allowance there as well. So if you can see from the pieces, these are our exact pieces where we cut them out, and now on the pink line we're going to add the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So again, using my measuring square, which I find to be the most useful, but you could use a ruler, I'm going to just lay it right up next to the pattern piece, and I can see through the square where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is, which is very helpful. And wherever I have a pink line to indicate I need that seam allowance, I'm just going to go ahead and trace that square. So I'm going to do that on all the pieces. And once I have that completed, that's going to be my actual new pattern with the color blocking included. So here we go. Make sure you leave enough room on your pattern, on the paper, that you can actually add the seam allowance appropriately to all the pieces. All right, kind of gives you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. So we have a 1/4 inch seam allowance added to all of the front where it's going to be the center front, and then a 1/4 inch seam allowance added for every cut that we made horizontally in that pattern. Once you have that finished, you're going to cut those pieces out. So this is what you're going to end up with. So we have 7 different pieces that we're going to work with for the front of the dress. And I've decided in the construction of this dress to leave the back pieces just a solid color, but you would use the same technique for color blocking on the back if you decided to do it all the way around the dress. So I'm going to go ahead and take these pieces and cut them out with my fabric. Okay, now that we have our pieces cut out and we have decided what type of color block pattern we are interested in, we're going to go ahead and sew that garment together. This part isn't bad at all. The key is to really make sure that when you're doing the measurement for adding the 1/4 inch seam allowance to each pattern piece, that's really what's going to determine how well your garment lines up when you sew it together. So what I like to do is still lay it out in a way that I want it to appear after it's sewn together, so that my mind remembers which pieces I'm working with at a time. So I'm just going to set the left half of the garment to the side and sew this right side first, and then we'll add to the second. So I'm literally just gonna add the seam allowance back in where we removed it when we cut the pattern into blocks. I'm using a stitch length of about a 3, just a straight stitch, and I'm using a neutral thread because there's so many colors. So the stitch length should be small enough that you can't see the stitches through the front of the color block. I like how it's looking so far. Remember, we chose that hem piece is actually going across both front sections, so we're going to save that until we have the left front put together. So let's go ahead and set those pieces to the side and work with these 3. I would recommend that when you're selecting the fabric for the color blocks that you use fabric that's all of equal weight, so you don't have some that seem a little bit more transparent than others. So we have both sides together, and then we have the final block that we're going to use at the hem. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and press these 2 pieces open and do that center seam and then attach the hem length. So let's do Great. Now that we have all of our pieces pressed open, what we're going to go ahead and do is sew the center seam of the 2 front sections. Now you'll notice the way we chose to color block this particular one, that there's only one seam that actually has to line up on the front of it, and that's this one right here. If we had chose to do a color block where it was equally distributed blocks on each side, then you would have to be really careful to match the seams of each side. But in this case, we made it pretty easy. So let's go ahead and sew that center front seam together. All right, let's go ahead and check that seam lineup and see how we did. Great, I think it actually lined up perfectly, so I'm super happy with that. Another reason you want to make sure that your seams line up, if you decide to do this color block pattern and you want to add some contrast, you can always use a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch satin ribbon and line the lines. And so that makes it really pop. I'm not going to do it on this particular pattern, but you can keep that in mind just to add one more dimension to your design. So I'm going to go ahead and press that seam open and attach the lower hem block, and then we're good to go. The back of the project is looking so far. Pretty nice. All the seams are pressed open. They seem to be lining up well. And now we're just going to go ahead and add that last front block to the hem edge. So let's sew that in place. We'll press that seam open, and then we'll put the darts in the front of the dress. Now that we have all of our pieces sewn together on the color block, I'm going to go ahead and mark the placement of the dart. So I generally just put a little hole at the end of the dart where it ends with my seam ripper, and then I use a heat erasable marker to mark the placement of the darts. Now remember to do this on the back of the fabric so that you can actually find that line again when you're putting your pin in the end. So I'm going to do it here. Nice. All right, so I'm just going to take a simple straight pin and mark where I put that dot. I'm going to fold the fabric to itself and sew the dart in place. All right, so here's what we've got so far. So this is our color block. I think it's coming together quite nicely. So let's finish our construction and see how it turned out. Now that we have the back sections attached to the dress, we're just going to go ahead and place the lining on top of it, and then we're going to pin it. We're going to sew around the armhole edge up through the neck on both sides and also along the hem edge. Now that we have the neck and armhole edge sewn as well as the hem edge, I'm just going to clip in towards the seam allowance and trim the seams down just a bit. Then we'll take it over to the ironing board and do that ironing of the seams. All right, well, I think the construction of the garment's going pretty well so far. Now that we have everything pretty much pressed, what we're going to do is take it back over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to serge both the left and right back opening closed and prepare the collar piece. And in this case, I just chose to use the same thing we used at the hem to bring that color back into play. All right, now that we have the back opening serged shut, the next step is going to be to go ahead and prepare the collar piece. In this case, it's a really easy collar. You'll notice on the pattern, if you use this particular pattern, that there's an opening where you don't sew, and that's for right where you're going to insert the collar to the dress. Now that we have the dress constructed and the collar constructed, you can see that it's just going to slip into that opening that we left. And you can hand finish this or machine stitch it. It totally depends what you like to do better, but as you can see, it's going to go something like this. All right, since I have white thread on my machine, I'm going to hand stitch it in place, but before I do that, I'm going to sew the center back seam of the dress from the hem edge to the dot. And again, you're going to refer back to your pattern piece to see where that dot actually ends. So in this case, it's going to be about here. So I've been constructing this dress today for Sissy. I thought she would really like to rock a mod color block dress. So I'm gonna try it on her before I do the final finishing steps, which are super easy. So we're just gonna make sure that we like the neck placement for the collar. And I've already just pinned it in place. I just wanna make sure that it obviously goes all the way around and snaps in the back. And then I also wanna make sure that the back fits her. So let's just check that. I'm going to mark the placement of the snaps with my heat erasable marker, and then I'm going to add the snaps in place, and then we're going to add some other things like a wig, some tights, and some cool go-go boots. So we'll see how the outfit finally finished out. So all right, that's it. We made it to the end of our sewing tutorial for today. I hope you'll try these techniques to make a really cool mod outfit out of a simple pattern and turn it into a color block. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and as always, please hit that subscribe button, share this content with your friends if it's something they would enjoy as well, and I'll see you in the next video.